Welcome to another Enterprise session from the University of Bristol. My name is Professor Michelle Barber, and today I'm speaking with Dr. Camilla Morelli. Camilla, I'm really grateful for you for finding time to speak to me. Thank you.
Hi, Michelle. Thank you so much. I'm also so grateful to be here.
Brilliant. Well, I'm really looking forward to diving into your work, your research, and how you're looking to commercialize and bring that to a wider audience. And I know a little bit about what you do. I know it's going to be a really exciting sort of story. But let's maybe kind of look back first of all. So tell me a bit about yourself. Where were you before you were in Bristol? What brought you to Bristol? A little bit about your background.
Absolutely. I am a senior lecturer in social anthropology and I am Italian. So I grew up in Italy. I studied for my undergraduate degree in anthropology in Rome. And then I did an exchange program in Manchester, at the University of Manchester. I fell in love with the British style of university, of academia. And I decided to move here, do a PhD, and then I just stayed. And I do research with children and young people, mainly in the Amazon rainforest. So for the past 15 years, I've been doing ethnographic fieldwork with them, mainly in Peru. And mainly with the Matses, an indigenous group that have a very recent history of contact with national society. And I go there every year, so that's my absolute passion.
Fascinating. Let's explore that a little bit more. But first of all, I will confess, if pressed, I'm not sure I could deliver a pithy definition of ethnographic research. So for the benefit of ignorant people like me, and I'm sure there are others, what does that mean in simple terms?
Yeah, so it's our fault. Anthropologists are not very good at putting out in the external what we do. So ethnographic means that I am interested in seeing how people live and give meaning to the world. And to do that, I use ethnographic methods, which means that I work with people directly. I ask them questions about what they think about the world, how they see the world, and specifically with children in my case, and how they live their lives. So it's an approach where knowledge is generated through an engagement with people in the field.
That's enormously helpful. Thank you. And I think a lot of people who aren't researchers don't necessarily picture researchers doing that. We think about research on populations or groups of people, but they're distant from the researcher, whereas you're very much hand in hand working, maybe even co-creating some of that research with the individuals. Is that fair to say?
Yes, absolutely. So we are fully immersed in the everyday life of the people that we work with. So, the first time I went to the Amazon to do my PhD research, I stayed there for a year in a village with no electricity, no connection. And so I was really fully immersed in that kind of lifestyle. And it was the best year of my life, of course. And I am really committed, like you were saying, to a kind of research that is collaborative from the outset. Especially throughout the years, I've developed this approach where I discuss my research projects from the start with my participants. And we see how these projects can benefit them. And then we develop together all the research and the outputs, and we are co-publishing now. So, yes.
Wonderful. It sounds so fascinating. And you mentioned in that last answer that you started this during your PhD. So I suppose a two-part question. Why the Amazon rainforest? Of all the places in the world you could have chosen to do your ethnographic research and your PhD, why specifically that area? And then you're not from there. And you will in many ways be different from the people that you're trying to engage with. So how does one go about building those relationships, building the trust? Because I'm guessing you need to have a really close relationship with these individuals to actually get what you need and for them to get what they want out of the relationship. So how do you go from, hi, I'm Camilla, nice to meet you, all the way to that really deep, trusting relationship? So the why, the place, and the how do you do it?
Yes, it's a really great question. So it started because I was interested. I was really deeply curious and interested to find out how a child grows up in a rainforest environment, how they develop a particular set of ideas, a worldview about themselves, about others, about nature in the rainforest. And I had my own imagination of how these children will be giving meaning to the world. I thought, you live in the rainforest, that's the best thing ever, right? So I thought these children will be talking about the forest all the time. And Mats's children have very recent history of contact, as I was saying, so they're used to living in the forest for generations and they spend most of their lives there. And when I arrived in the field, I very quickly realized that the children were not as interested in the forest as I expected, and especially they were not as close to the forest, as drawn to it as their parents and grandparents.
Oh, interesting. So first, when you started talking, I wondered if it was because it's what they know, it's their environment. It's a bit like you don't think about the color of your carpet or your walls too much. So I wondered if it was that familiarity made it almost not noteworthy, but actually, no, that's not it. You're saying that the generational sort of difference in different generations of these peoples feel differently. Is that right?
A huge intergenerational difference. So for the elders, the forest is everything. The world is the forest, and they still spend most of their time there. Every day they go hunting, they go collecting medicinal plants, foraging. But the children don't share this passion. They were born in a world where the city was already there, even though most of the children at the time when I started doing research with them, they had never even seen the city, but they knew it was there. And that's everything they talked about.
So they were curious about what they couldn't see as opposed to what they were seeing every day. They had this wish or need to learn about other places.
They had glimpses of it because they could go to a kind of town sometimes, maybe once a year. They managed to watch TV and they just thought that was more desirable, more captivating than the world of the forest. And I was probably part of it too, in a sense, because all of a sudden this woman arrives and they hadn't seen many people from Europe, let's say at the time. And I brought cameras for them to use. I had a laptop and I had all this knowledge about the city, and that's everything they wanted to talk with me about.
So you wanted to talk to them about their lives, but they were more interested in your life.
Absolutely. They were saying, why are you asking me about the forest when we could be
This is boring. Tell me about the city.
Exactly. Michelle, that's the exact word they use. They say the forest is boring. And they were saying the city is so much fun, and they wanted to know about it. And a lot of people at the beginning started telling me, oh, don't worry. Well, you'll see when they grow up, they will decide that actually the forest is better and they will stay. But throughout the years, I have seen the children actually moving out of the forest and to the city because they had these dreams. So, Michelle, one day a 10-year-old child told me, "Cemento bunchiebi," which in her language means, I am hungry for concrete. So these children were just craving the concrete world of the city. And they started moving to the city. And in the Amazon is seen a huge migration from forest areas to urban areas. And the problem is that they had an imagination of what life would be that did not match reality.
I was wondering that as you were saying, because I guess it's a version of the grass is greener, isn't it? That, they know this forest, this place where their parents and grandparents think is wonderful and really is their whole world. They've got this imagining of what the glamour and excitement of the city might be. But goodness me, city life is not all glamorous and exciting. So I guess that maybe didn't always end well. Did they move back? I guess, do you even follow them from that point on, or can you know?
Yes, so I follow all of them. I follow them very closely. I'm really very invested in their lives. And it was very difficult for most of them because, first of all, as they all told me, I went to the city and I thought I'll find a job immediately. And they struggled. And a lot of them told me when I moved to the city, I didn't have enough money to buy food. So I couldn't fall asleep at night because I was just in my bed feeling hungry. So it's heartbreaking, some really heartbreaking stories. But at the same time, also some really hopeful, successful stories that give a very hopeful view of what the future can be for these young people.
Okay, gosh, what a wonderful way of research and a wonderful world to immerse yourself in. Let's move forward now because we're here to talk about the enterprise sessions. And indeed, you have been one of my enterprise fellows. It's not immediately obvious at this stage how you would take this wonderful immersive research with these people and convert that into something that has a sort of an enterprise dimension. So maybe let's bring ourselves a little bit more up to date because we've been talking about your historical work. What was your driver for starting to think in a more entrepreneurial way? What were you trying to achieve, or what opportunity did you see?
Yes, so something that I started doing with these children. So when the children started growing up and moving to the city, and then they had become young people, and it was much easier to talk with them, of course, because they were older, to talk with them about the research itself. Something I started doing is that a key issue that I saw with these children that are moving to the city is that besides the economic hardship, all the challenges they find, they wanted to tell their stories because they felt that nobody. One day a young man told me, I feel as if the world doesn't know that we exist.
And he's probably right to a large extent. Absolutely. I have a lot of sympathy from that position. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so what we started at the same time, I started working here at Bristol. And Bristol is an international hub for creative industries and particularly the animation industry. So I started building these interdisciplinary teams with researchers, indigenous researchers, and artists and animators. And we started co-producing animations with these young people through which they can tell their stories and share them with others. And we use this for impact as well, because then we work with the government. We use the films that they make to share what their needs are, what their hopes and aspirations are. And we really teach them how to make films from start to finish, to the point that some of them are now making their own films and they're building a career out of it.
And back to your early point about when some of these young people move to the city, they struggle to find jobs. I would imagine that the sort of skills that are needed in city jobs aren't always the skills you come with if you've grown up in a rainforest, whereas filmmaking and all of the sort of technological side of that, very marketable skills, as well as the satisfaction of telling their own stories. So it's almost serving two purposes.
Yes, absolutely. So part of what we are doing now is that we are trying to embed in the school curriculum this kind of digitalization, digital skill transfer. So then these kids will be more prepared in a sense for this kind of sector. So what we did is that we produced a lot of animations. They were all non for profit. They had some results, but what we wanted to do next was to turn this endeavor into a commercial kind of enterprise that again will benefit primarily the young people in the forest that we work with.
So you've got this sort of development of this content, working with these young people and really driven by them. They've told you they need to tell their stories. But it's one thing to create content. We're creating content right now, aren't we? But it's another thing to draw it to the attention of the people. Either you want them to see it, or they in some way need to see it because they have a responsibility to provide for these young people or in a position of authority. So having made these animations, how do you then make sure they are seen by people who should see them?
This actually has been one of the crucial things about that the Enterprise Fellowship has been instrumental in helping us develop, because these animations have been seen by policymakers, by the government, by UNESCO, UNICEF, so all these different groups are using them. And actually, we're working with some very big youth agencies who are now applying the same approach in their practice. But this remains in the kind of policy sector, which is important, but it's not everything. We also want to reach the wider public in a way that, again, will benefit these young people, like you were saying. So one key thing that I wanted to learn through this fellowship was how do we reach a broader audience? And I realized that I didn't have the skills, I didn't have the knowledge, I didn't have the contacts. And these are all things that I built throughout the fellowship.
So tell me a little bit more about the fellowship. The fellowship scheme's been run for a few years now, and we have actually had good uptake from the arts and humanities, but we never had anyone from an anthropology background do this before. So when you were looking at what you wanted to achieve with working with your young people in the Amazon and you were considering your options, did it feel like a fit because it's unusual in your discipline? Did you look at this and go, that's what I need? Or did you look at this and think, gosh, that's kind of unfamiliar, but I'll give it a try? Like, how confident did you feel?
It definitely felt like something unfamiliar. But that is a kind of important part of anthropology in itself, delving into the unfamiliar. So that was...
It's familiar to be unfamiliar.
Yes. So I very often kind of thought of parallels between this project and, for example, learning a new language. A new language, but also a new cultural language, because the creative industry has its own language. Sure. Yeah, and at the beginning, I did not speak it, and I did not understand. I found myself in these boardrooms at the beginning with these kind of big names, big people, and I was very fresh. I didn't really know how things worked, and I feel that in the past couple of years, I have learned that language. So now I think back about those meetings, and now I know what was going on. Yes, it was definitely something very new. But at the same time, what I saw is that there's a real appetite in the creative industry to work with anthropologists now, because especially there's a new generation of filmmakers who want to do things differently. They don't want to go to a community in the Amazon rainforest, film, go home and edit. And they want to work collaboratively as well.
But like you say, you didn't have the skills initially to engage with the industry and you learned them. The industry doesn't have the skills to engage with these indigenous peoples the way you do as an anthropologist. Like this is something that is learned over a career. So I guess I can see why that partnership is so important.
Yes, and I feel that it's being increasingly valued in the creative industries themselves. So we started working with a director who will direct the final product. And we were actually approached by them because they were exactly saying we want to develop this new approach, this new way of making TV, of making films that will start from a collaboration. And this is the part I'm most excited about because the young people that will work at what we are making will be credited, they will own part of the rights. So it's, yes.
Really exciting. Camilla, you and I are both academic entrepreneurs, and in an academic context, that already makes us a little bit unusual. It's not as unusual as it was, but most academics aren't in the sort of enterprise domain, and you and I both are. We're also both women, and that puts us in an even smaller group, because if we look at people who put them forward for these sorts of, like, these particular sorts of academic career paths, or who apply for these kind of funding that we've been talking about, there are far more men than women. And I wonder, how has that been for you? Have you felt that? Have you felt that you're in a kind of minority, or has it not really touched you? And did it put you off, or did you not really think about it? I'm happy to share my views as well, but how has it been for you?
Yes, absolutely. I absolutely felt that at various stages of the process in what I'm trying to develop. And the way it made me act is that sometimes it makes me be very defensive because I just assume that I just know that it's going to be very particularly hard for a woman. Even though I belong to an absolute privileged category of people in the world.
For sure.
Yes.
Nevertheless.
But yes, I was surprised, to be honest, to see how in a certain kind of business sector, there are still some gender inequalities that I did not think would be there. Even just in the language that you find in some kind of, business training, certain things, it's language that should change. What do you think?
I've got a really funny story about that, which I'll tell you. I agree. I think I've always been quite a kind of contrary person. So knowing when I went on my first entrepreneurial journey, which is more than 10 years ago now, so we're doing this at different times in history almost, but it didn't put me off. There's a belligerent side to me that goes, I'm different from the rest of them. Good, I'll show them. Like that's just part of my makeup. Fine. What surprised me was not that I would find myself in a room with all men, or I expected that, and that didn't inherently trouble me as such. But I think as academics, I don't want to generalize too much, but our sector, I think, is quite ahead in terms of equalities, in terms of the language we use, in terms of the assumptions we make, in terms of just how our policies, I'm not saying we've got everything right, but our policies and our processes tend to be quite objective and equitable in comparison to other sectors, such as the ones that you and I were both entering. I was talking to sort of big corporates and companies, but I was also talking a lot to investors. And if anyone's going to Google who invested in my company, they were great, but they're the ones I took the investment from. There was a lot that I didn't or didn't offer it to me for reasons that I wonder about. I do have some particular soapboxes that I get off. I had to speak very, very firmly to a company that's doing some work for my spin out recently when they kept addressing letters to dear sirs, which I will just not have. Like I said, I quote, the time when we can assume that anyone in a position of power or influence is a man is long behind us. And I did get a very fulsome apology and assertion that they would do differently another time. There was also a time when I went to an event at a sort of entrepreneur space in Bristol, and it was about fundraising. It was about how you can, different ways to raise money for your company. It was quite funny, actually, because the person that was training, he started saying, right, so put your hands up. We were all representing small companies and startups. Put your hand up if you had money from venture capital firms. Some of us put hands up. What about angels? Hands up. What about European funds? What about Innovate UK? What about crowdfunding? What about There's about 8. I was the only person in the room who had done all of them. I felt like I'd taken a Pokemon approach to startup funding. He's like, got to catch them all. And I did. But then he went on in his slide deck to paint a picture, I guess marketing people call it personas, don't they? Of here are different types of founder and the things they're likely to do. And straight away, anything that pigeonholes people just gets really on my nerves, even as a principal. But then he painted the conservative, not very bold, tends to be very safe, tends to make very incremental process, will not give high returns on investment and this kind of thing, as, let's say, a woman in her 50s. Like, here's Caroline, and here's this person, and this person is ambitious and dynamic and will be bold and will make great returns for their investors. And of course, this was James, who was a man in his 30s. So I kicked off. So I put my hand up and I said, the fact that you are painting these people and these stereotypes, you are part of the problem. You are perpetuating the stereotype. It is hard for women. I wasn't the only woman in the room, but I was certainly the only one that spoke on that occasion. And in a sense, that's partly why I did do it, is everyone in this room needs to hear it, including the women who are already so much in the minority. I said, by perpetuating this, you are absolutely against progress. And I'm sure you don't realize it. I don't know if you realized it or not, but I told him. And it certainly didn't get a round of applause. It certainly caused a sort of like shocked hush in the room. But even if like 10% of the people in the room went away and thought, yeah, maybe I shouldn't always use he when I'm referring to a CEO. Maybe we shouldn't always call them the chairman, even if they're a woman. Maybe I shouldn't make those assumptions. Even if one person went away and thought, she did kind of have a point there, then I win. I'll never know if they did or not, but I won because I said what I said. I just called out. But in a university setting, we'd very rarely uncover that kind of thing these days. When I started off, I've been an academic for 20 years, and there was a little bit of that then. I can remember kicking off in a staff training session when I was a brand new academic about some stereotypes where I just felt this is really not helpful. But I don't see that now. And I think things have moved on a long way. But then when you put your head above the parapet and you look at the outside world, I think some attitudes towards gender and other protected characteristics are quite far behind our daily life, at least in the way I experience it in an academic setting.
Yeah, definitely. I think academia is coming a long way. There are still some very subtle kind of things and issues. So in my introduction to social anthropology unit, there's a lecture on Margaret Mead and categories of classification. And I do this exercise with my students, first year students, they just arrived. And I ask them to close their eyes and I say a word and then they have to picture something. And my word is professor. And then I ask them what they picture. And they're very, very honest, because
it's probably Einstein, right?
And it's like an older white male. And I get them to think about their accent. And they say they speak with the Queen's English or with the King's English. And then I say, now open your eyes and look at me. And it's something else. Nice, so it's there are things that are still out there. But I think it's exactly like you say, it's a matter of the stories we put out there, the images we put out there.
It is. And I think, at least you and I exist now. So if the students do come in, I'm not an anthropologist, but I might try that with my dental materials students. But at least we are there doing those things and they can see that. And that's our privilege and theirs, if you like. Back in the kind of like commercial entrepreneurial world, I think one thing that's really changed since I started out 11 years ago is there's now, certainly in Bristol, a really growing community of really strong female founders and entrepreneurs. And that helps because you might be part of a community, you might get together, you might support each other, but partly just because you can see it. And even if it's not someone you interact with on a daily basis, when you get to the office, there's Jenny. Jenny's awesome. Jenny's doing really cool stuff. Oh, look, and there's Annalisa. And so just being in an environment where there's more, and gender is only one aspect of diversity, there's many. I do feel, and we're further behind, I think, in others, but I do feel at least there is more representation now than there was when I started out. We've still got a long way to go. There's no denying it. I did go to a really interesting event actually at Oxford Brookes last year. The aim was to encourage more women to consider becoming angel investors. So I wasn't there. I'm not in a position to become an investor. We're academics. We don't do it for the money. But there were women in the room there who were in a position in theory to become investors if they wished. And it was more like, was it something that appealed to them? And I really appreciate that initiative because actually it's not only that women are going to invest in women and men are going to invest in men. It shouldn't work that way. And it does a little bit. It shouldn't work that way. But we do need diversity at all levels and at all stages in all of these processes. And I find a lot of initiatives that want to address diversity and diversity gaps start with gender and then can build out to other maybe less visible or maybe visible but trickier. If you've got lots of categories, how do you make sure you're sort of being inclusive across it? They often start with gender and it's a good place to start, I guess.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's dig a bit more into the actual content, what you were creating during this time? Because I think a particular focus of yours is climate change, climate breakdown, climate anxiety, and so on. Let's move from the children telling their stories in a generic sense to tell us a bit more about the specific focus that you developed.
So initially we started by focusing on climate anxiety. Some of our projects with coastal communities were primarily about climate anxiety. Actually, the broader focus of our work is on children and young people's views of the future, and the key issue we are addressing is their anxiety towards their adulthood.
So climate, I guess, a subset of that, but actually there's plenty of things for any young people to be anxious about, and particularly those in marginalized communities or remote communities or changing communities.
Absolutely. Yeah. So there is definitely, without a doubt, there's a youth mental health crisis. Yeah. Everywhere. And this is partly because children are feeling really anxious about this future that looks increasingly precarious in general. Exactly like you were saying, in vulnerable communities, these children are facing a variety of intersected issues. So the climate anxiety is a part of it. So the planet is on fire, the coastal communities are sinking, the Amazon is being destroyed, and the communities I work with in the Amazon, for example, are facing these huge threats of heritage loss. So the United Nations are saying that by next century, most of the world's languages will be forgotten. And they rely so much on the knowledge that is transmitted through these languages. The idea that all this heritage will be left behind is posing a real threat to these young people's views of the future.
So is your primary motivation to address that directly, to try and stop or do your part to stop that decline and that loss? Or is it more to empower the children to do something about it? Like, how directly are you trying to intervene?
My primary aim is to inspire these children and young people to feel hopeful towards the future and to start working with them to create new narratives. Because part of the problem we are addressing is that children and young people pretty much everywhere are bombarded with media, public discourses that paint the future as a future of doom. As you know, the apocalypse is coming, and we need to put new narratives out there. And our goal is to engage children and young people in creating these new narratives, these new stories of hope, while at the same time, of course, doing something that is practical and tangible to help them achieve these futures. So to give you a very kind of tangible example, so we engage children in making animations about their desired futures. And something that, for example, some of the animations they produced were about women creating a program of scholarships for women in the villages and then going back and teaching girls about these programs. And then we are feeding these results to the Ministry of Education in Peru so that a tangible action can be taken.
So fantastic. So the children, that's much more immediate than I had imagined it was going to be, actually. I'd imagined almost a child imagines a future when there's a teacher that comes to the village and teaches the girls, and then in 10, 20 years, they become that teacher. Whereas actually, this is really real time. They're imagining something that could have a real impact on their lives. You're feeding that into the policymakers and they're delivering it not long afterwards. So it's a much quicker feedback loop than I'd initially pictured.
Yes, absolutely. And for example, we're also working with UNESCO, and UNESCO is rolling out this huge program of teaching children in different parts of the Amazon various things. And they actually asked us to contribute through this animation production. So then all the children in different parts of the Amazon will be animating, will be learning digital skills. So in a sense, yes, there's the long-term view, but there's also a much shorter kind of intervention time that.
How incredibly satisfying and exciting that must be for you to see that, because you're an incredibly important bridge.
Yes, that's kind of my hope, is to create this bridge. But then it's very important for me to create a kind of research context where I am not needed in any way, in a sense. Yeah. So, for example, when we teach them to make animations, and I say we teach them, but it's the animators in the team that teach them how to make animations, they do it in a way that the children and the young people learn how to make these films with resources that they have from start to finish. So what is very interesting is that we leave and they keep messaging us and sending us the videos that they make after we have left. So everybody it's a project that kind of keeps going by itself.
There's almost your redundancy built into it, isn't there? That Absolutely. Sort of like, my job here is done, Mary Poppins style. And
Absolutely. But also what's interesting is that they become hugely better and more successful than us. So this group of people that we work with, we made these animations with them, and then they got a grant from the government to make a feature film by themselves. So that it's their work.
Incredible.
So yes, I think, because obviously, like you asked me before a question about being someone who comes from outside and wants to do things, which is always very delicate, is politically complicated, and there are all sorts of problems and people that have done really bad work in the past this sense. What I think is important is that, of course, for someone who works in the UK, has access to certain resources and certain skills and all of these things. And I think it's very important to share them with others, to have this equitable world in mind, like you're saying, in the kind of longer term future. Yeah. This is really all I'm doing. I want to share this with these children, young people that I've been knowing for a long time, and that I know they can benefit from it.
What sort of scale are we talking about? When you're talking about these children, young people you've built these amazing bonds with over the years, how many? Ones, tens, hundreds? Like, what's the sort of scale of the operation?
It's becoming more and more. So at the beginning, my research, when I started, I worked in a village of 200 people. And most of them were children. So there were a lot of children, but still it was a kind of smaller number. Then we started getting bigger grants and working with more people. And the key thing is that now what we are doing at the moment is that we are training some Amazonian teachers that then will train other children. Yeah. So we are looking, and again, we will have nothing to do with it. The project will just keep going. So we are looking at, yes, hopefully many, like big numbers.
Forgive me, but I have a commercial mindset. I'm thinking this sounds like a franchise operation. It sounds like that's your approach, is training local teachers who are then training those children, and then some of them will become the local teachers. Yes. and so on.
Yes, absolutely. And some of these teacher in trainings, I am now acting as their remote mentor. So they will write their dissertations on these projects. And one beautiful story that we have is that one of these children that were dreaming of concrete, this 15, 20 years ago, has now later moved to the city. And he started studying anthropology. His name is Roldan. Yes, and he graduated and he became the first anthropologist in his whole society.
Oh, how incredible.
Which is amazing. And we met at the beginning because he was a participant in my pilot project the beginning, funded by the Brixton Institute. So a total pilot thing that we did where we were trying animation for the first time, animation co-production. So he took part as a participant. He was brilliant. And then I got this grant from the British Academy, so we hired him as a research assistant. And because the pandemic happened, he had to do most of the data collection, which was incredible, and he was amazing. And now we just co-published an article together in a really good journal. And now he's doing a PhD in anthropology in Brazil. So he is the future. He's the future of anthropology, the hopeful future that we have.
Oh, that's glorious to have inspired that. And you must reflect on that quite personally, because there's the sort of cliche to be it, you've got to see it. You're an anthropologist, you go there, and one of your young people sees that as something that he thinks he can do too. And indeed he is doing it too.
Yes, and he's doing it so much better. He's going to become hugely more successful than me, of course. And we shared the methodology. We developed the methodology together. And last year he got a grant as a principal investigator to use this animation co-production in his own project. And then they showed us what they did in the Amazon, all these animations that they made. They were incredible. So they're really becoming, hugely successful. So that's great to see.
That's wonderful. Having spent so long working in the Amazon, do you ever look at other parts of the world and think, could I have a similar impact for other communities who are equally in need, but maybe don't have access to what you've brought to this community?
Sometimes people contact me from other places and they say, do you want to come and do this project here? Which for us is always the question of, we need to get the funding, essentially. Course, So, but if someone approaches me and asks me, can you share your methodology with us? Absolutely, because this is something that is to be shared with others.
But you don't want to do it. You're committed to the Amazonian communities. You're not tempted to go somewhere else in the world.
We've done work in different parts, in different places.
Okay.
And yes, in the future, for sure, we will work in different locations. I do have a personal relationship, a very close relationship with specifically the children I've done. They're not children anymore, but for me, in a sense, some of them will forever be children. I've worked with them for so long, and an amazing thing actually happened 2 days ago. I got a phone call from a good friend of mine from the village where I've done my PhD research, which is really remote and they have no connection. So I thought, oh, maybe he's gone to the city, but he never travels to the city. So I thought, this is interesting. And so I called him back, we video called, and he was calling me from the village.
Oh,
they put
amazing.
internet connection there. So now in the past week, I've got the 2 days or something, I got so many messages from people there saying, hey, how are you? The kids are sending me messages. It's amazing, yes.
How do the older generations feel, both about what you're doing, but also about that incursion of tech into their world? Because I can see how the kids, from everything you told me, are probably thinking this is brilliant. But what about their parents, their grandparents? How do they feel about
That's
it?
a really interesting point, Michelle, because when I first arrived, I saw this intergenerational different reaction towards me as well, because everybody really welcomed me from the start. But the children thought that my knowledge, my skills, using a laptop, they're just the best thing ever. But the elderly people, not really. They thought that, people like me are pretty useless because we can't, we can track. Exactly. Exactly. So, and they really looked after me because they knew that I couldn't just move in the Amazon skillfully by myself. But it's not that they had an admiration for my skills or they think that using a laptop is pretty. Yeah, it's not particularly great.
Well, in their lives, I guess at that stage, they hadn't seen that it could do anything for them. Like, well, why is this useful skill? Yeah,
Exactly. But then throughout the years, actually, especially with this animation work, things have changed a bit. And one incredible thing that happened is that I started traveling to the Amazon with my collaborator, who's a Bristol-based animator. And one day, the elders approached us and they said, you have to do a project for us. Mm-hmm. And they said that an amazing thing that you have in the Amazon is this mythology that tells a whole different story about people and nature. And it's not fantasy. This is something that from an Amazonian perspective merges with history. Yeah. So it's real. But like I was saying before, it's getting lost because the young generations are not learning these myths. And the elders are so concerned. And they saw how much the kids love doing work with us. It's just the kids really, they adore it. And so they said, why don't you make animations about these myths? So the kids will finally learn them because maybe they don't listen to us, but they will watch them on their phone.
It's a great growth mindset from those individuals, isn't it? Is what we've done for generations, as in oral traditions of telling these myths, isn't working. But here's a new technology, if that's even a word they might have used, but here's a new technology. Rather than being hostile and turning our backs to it, let's use that to achieve our ends, which is making sure our kids and grandkids know these myths.
Absolutely.
Brilliant. And did you do it?
Yes, we did. We did, actually. We had some British Academy funds and we created these myths and part of it, so this is the basis of now the project, the pitch that we have developed as part of the Enterprise Fellowship, because this is our idea at the basis of our project as it is now. So to work with, to address this issue with the community of this heritage loss that they're concerned about. And there will be 2 parts of the project. We will train the children and the young people in animation making, but our director will also train them in filmmaking. And so there will be all this training involved that then they can use themselves and they can keep going.
And all the while, they're soaking up these myths from their parents and grandparents.
Yes.
Maybe without even realizing that's what they're doing.
Absolutely. But when
they're learning.
So when we did this project, I checked and I asked all the kids about these myths and they didn't know them. And then by the end, everybody was talking about the myths. So it was cool. It was really, yes. But it's an idea that came from them. It didn't come from us.
Yeah,
so
that's brilliant though. It's fantastic. All the better. So tell me a little bit more about the sort of the commercial dimension of this, because you said you started off making these videos and these films and these animations, but you wanted to make this into more of a sort of commercial endeavor. So how did you start that? You said you found yourself in boardrooms. How did you get in? Like, who are you talking to? And how has it been received? How has it gone so far?
Bristol, I feel, is this international, center for creative industries, but it's also a small place. So, and something I started saying about the creative industries is that contacts are everything. Mm-hmm. And so we built on the few contacts we had to approach different people. Now I'm not going to make names.
No, of course not. No, but I suppose I'm asking because people might be inspired by this and think, well, how on earth do I get from there to here? So I guess you can make it generic. It doesn't have to be individuals, but how did you reach the people you needed to reach? How did you identify who it even was you needed to reach? So you knew you had to get to them.
Which is a great question, because at the beginning I had no idea of what the hierarchy was, who was who. But one thing is that I was not afraid in any way to just contact people. So we just contacted everyone we knew, and then we were asking, maybe a person or another person, and then they put us in touch with this other person. So this is how it kind of happened. After a while that we were doing this, that we were networking, building different contacts, some people started approaching us. Yeah, that was fantastic, because finally some people knew who we were, that we were doing this work. And then and then I think that the following step was that I realized we needed a team, because it's not that me and my collaborator could do the whole thing by ourselves. Sure, yeah. So we built a team, and now I feel this is the kind of one of the biggest points of success we had. And now we have this team of me and my collaborator, who's an animator, Roldan, who is the Maths researcher in the Amazon, Guillermo, who is an illustrator in the Amazon, my friend, my good friend Cindy, who is an Amazonian woman and who will support the project as well and take an active role in it. And then we're working with a film director. And the key thing is that we now have 2 producers. And yes, the producers being on our side was the major thing that we secured in a sense.
And let me be clear on your kind of throughout this process, when you're reaching out to people, and if that's not the right person, you get them to refer you on. What's your offer and what's your ask? So I guess, is it that your offer is you can enable them to co-produce films, animations and so on with Indigenous populations in the Amazon that they can't do without you and your team? Like, you can offer them something which is access and meaningful collaboration with people that they're just not going to reach otherwise. And then your ask is, come do us with it, and what, like, ultimately fund some of this work or share this work with a wider audience so that it can generate income to allow you to perpetuate it. So I don't want to put words in your mouth. I'm trying to work out what the commercial offer and ask is.
Yes. So what we offer is a series of things. So is a particular approach, because again, this is all based on co-production. And then we offer a series of ideas, so creative ideas, and yes, relationships and collaborations and all of that. And again, it seems that the creative industries are really keen to do things differently. And so they like that. And they also really appreciate some ideas are based on 15 years of research that I have done. So they really value that. They value the research behind.
Really solid foundation.
Yes. And what we ask is partly, yes, it's the funding, but also the production of the product and the distribution of it is something that is completely beyond me. So only people, this is what I realized through the fellowship, that we could only do this with people in the industry.
What's your dream of where this could go? Where do you want these animations most of all? Do you want them in the watershed? Do you want them in the British Museum? Like, where do you want these to get to?
My number one dream is to have a screening in the community.
Yes. Yeah.
And the way I see it is that I want to gather all of the community, have this massive cinema style film screening, and maybe I will bring popcorns in some way and we will have a cinema night.
Wonderful.
In the middle of the Amazon. This is my number one dream.
I mean, that would be incredible, and I really, really hope you achieve that. But in terms of, like, thinking back to the original conversation with one of the then children who wanted to get his story to a wider audience. So I suppose the question becomes not so much where do you want to get this, as well as back to the community themselves, but where do the young people want their story to be heard? Do they want it to be heard in particular parts of the world, or people in particular roles, politicians? I don't know.
So the young people want the kind of general public to access it. So although my number one dream is the community cinema, of course, our aim is to get this distributed by some major networks. And this is why the producers on our team are key, because they very regularly sell their work to major networks, and so this is why they're there. So yes, that's also, I guess, it will be exciting for the young people to show their stories
and find it on Netflix or other content providers are available, obviously. But fantastic.
But also on Peruvian, we are building links now with Peruvian networks because for them it will be really important to see it on those platforms.
Of course,
too.
Wonderful, fantastic. Zooming out a little bit, you're from anthropology, which of course would be part of our sort of arts and humanities research area and so on. When I started my job, when I started Enterprise Fellows, the prevailing feeling was very much that I'd get uptake from science, from engineering, from health sciences. I was told arts and humanities aren't going to look at this. And that was emphatically wrong. You're an example of that. But actually, there are several of examples. I've had at least proportionally as much uptake and interest and enthusiasm from arts and humanities as other sort of disciplines within a university setting. Do you recognise that? Do you have a view of why that is? Because it's not obvious that people with interests like yours would look at it in a commercial way, and yet you do, and so do others. But that wasn't the case 10 and 20 years ago, I think. So do you have a perspective on why that's the case?
I feel that there's a huge need and desire on our part to do something with our research. And I see, even I have changed. So at the beginning, I was happy to go to the Amazon, get some data, write a book about it. But now I'm not happy to do that anymore. Now I need to see that this research will do something out there in the world. Otherwise, I wouldn't be happy with it. And I feel that more and more people are pushed by the same need to get out in the real world and show how the research can be useful, why it can be important, do something with it. Also because, again, like the children and young people everywhere, we also see these visions, these views of the future as a future that is doomed. And so we also want to do something about it, make sure that, our research can change that.
So your adoption of a kind of entrepreneurial approach to this and looking at a commercial way of achieving what you want to achieve is a means to that end. It's not driven by, actually, I want to become an entrepreneur and make lots of money. It's driven by, I want my research to have a real impact, a lasting legacy. And this is the route that I see to get to that.
Yes, if I have to be, this is probably the worst entrepreneur in history, but money is not what drives me to, if I have to be completely honest. Well, no, actually, what I'm interested in the young people I work with to have better livelihoods, better income, absolutely. For myself, I'm an academic, so I think it's either things that drive us, but for sure. And this is actually one of the things that I've been telling the director from the start. I'm only making this film together if the community has part of the rights. These are not projects that people will become rich with, that's for sure. And nobody will. Everybody in these projects work at hugely reduced rates as well, because they're personally invested. So this is how it works. And then hopefully we can do something like, I don't know, once these stories are out there, then if anybody sees them and wants to help, they can help, hopefully. So, yes.
I don't think your description of yourself as the worst entrepreneur is at all accurate, actually. It's just, I suppose, it's what aspects of entrepreneurial behaviour that you want to adopt, and you don't have to take all of them,
Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you. Camilla, you have such an incredible story, and your deep connection and sort of bonds with these people is apparent in everything you say, and obviously over quite a number of years now. When you started out back in Rome with your degree in anthropology, if that Camilla could have seen where you are and what you're doing now and what sort of drives and motivates you, what would Camilla have thought? What would she think if she looks at you through the years?
I hope she'd be happy. It's what actually, she would probably be maybe a bit overwhelmed and kind of a bit surprised, maybe, I don't know, because it's, I didn't think that, to me, this was an absolute dream. Yeah. I come from a country, Michelle, that is not doing particularly great, I have to say. And my peers who have stayed were not able to follow their dream jobs, achieve their dream jobs or anything like that. I mean, obviously they are in a sunny country with their families.
That has its appeal, absolutely.
But it's really hard.
Yeah. And you've not done that. Admittedly, you're away from your family and your country of birth, but what you're doing and the impact, I'm trying very hard not to lead the witness here, because I want you to say young Camilla would be incredibly proud, because I think she should. But seeing that you've not limited your opportunities, in fact you've made your opportunities, you mentioned she'd be surprised.
She would be speechless in a sense, because I remember the feeling, like it happened 10 minutes ago. I remember the feeling when I was on a plane over the Atlantic, going to do my PhD fieldwork, I could not believe that I was doing what, Margaret Mead and Malinowski had done, and that someone was supporting me to do that. For me, that was just, I felt so lucky, so immensely privileged. And, I was this girl from rural Tuscany. I didn't think that I will ever have this chance in my life. And I think this is why now it's important that others have this chance too.
I couldn't agree more. And if you don't mind me saying so, I think you're still that girl. I think everything you say about your work feels like you can't quite believe how fortunate you are to be able to have these impacts and do these things. And I think that's a wonderful attitude to have, because it means we're never complacent. We're always driven.
Yes, yes.
Camilla, I have enjoyed this discussion so much, and it's wonderful to dive into your work and that deep, deep passion you have for it. So thank you. I'm really grateful to you for sharing your story.
Thank you. This was fantastic. Thank you so much for inviting me.